So just to back up on that, you think someone at Twitter is working with the CCP?
Oh, I know for a fact. Like, there are definitely spies for the CCP that work at Twitter and Google.
And they're suppressing stuff that they don't.
100%. And unfortunately, after the next election, we're going to investigate this. I'm very excited that the new regime in Congress will definitely look into what CCP spies are working at these technology companies.
Interesting. And so do you think, like, how do you actually solve this? Is it just more speech and sort of letting it
Yes.
be out there?
I think this is not, again, I generally default to very basic principles and they're almost always right and everything else is noise. Anything that can be published in a book should be allowed on Twitter. So if Donald Trump can write a book, he should be able to tweet. If he wants to write something that would be banned in a book, so, obscene, pornographic, we have principles for hundreds of years, actually arguably thousands, if you go back to, sort of Greece and stuff, that have worked. Why are we trying to come up with new principles when we know what works?
Do you not think that the scale of the internet and the ubiquity of some of this stuff changes the paradigm? Like, we need to rethink antitrust laws or some of these things because of the digital, the
I think that's
flywheel.
usually an excuse. And if someone has a reasonable argument, they should point to specifically what's different about a digital regime. But the printing press is basically all these controversies that people debate about Twitter were unlocked when the printing press happened. All the powers, all the governments that existed, all the religions that existed hated the printing press. But the printing press has been one of the best things ever for mankind.
Yeah. Interesting. You touched on China. I can't be remiss to you've been pretty vocal anti China and other. I mean, congrats on the Midas list, but other funds out there have entire strategies in China. What do you like? Do you think that is at odds with being a pro-U.S. American fund?
Well, I definitely think it's morally and ethically at odds. It's legally permissible, which I think the law should change. I don't think it should be acceptable for an American fund to invest in China without the CCP changing sort of either its principles or being, removed from power.
Yeah.
But I think that's up to Congress to change the law. So they're not for the most part, I don't think these funds are violating the law. I think we at Founders Fund believe as American citizens, we have an obligation not to help the CCP. So we would never invest in things that would help the CCP. And we're pretty critical of funds that do, while taking the privileges and advantages of being an American.
Has that been something I've noticed it of late? Is it something to draw a distinction more and more and call people's attention to the potential conflicts that exist here?
Well, I definitely think the agenda of the CCP is now more activist, both internally and externally. And I think, therefore, it's more obvious to a broader swath of the American public how we have to confront some of these problems as opposed to ignore them.
Yes.
So therefore, I think there's going to be more pressure on financial services firms, just like there's going to be more pressure on corporations that do business with China.
Yeah, interesting. And the other thing that exists in all of this is TikTok, right? And what is possibly going to, I spent a lot of time on it. Redpoint has a TikTok presence on it, right? It's an amazing platform in so many ways, and it's also absolutely terrifying, right?
Yeah, so I'm not allowed to use TikTok, as you might guess. So fundamentally, yeah, I was an advocate of the Trump administration's tentative decision to ban TikTok. I think we should absolutely ban TikTok for a variety of good reasons. Actually, I think that one of the issues the Trump administration got into was there was 2 or 3 distinct reasons to ban TikTok. Yeah. And rather than just settle on one and, how the policy followed that, they were trying to triangulate these 3 different reasons. There's an economic retaliation reason, like American social media companies are not allowed in China.
Yes.
Arguably, we should have reciprocal rules. But there's a national security rationale, which I think is pretty important. And I think that was probably the one that they should have pursued. And ultimately, the American administration needs to ban TikTok.
Yeah. Or at least bring the code base to the United States.
Yeah, there may be ways to
make it work otherwise.
To at least minimize the national security damage, absolutely. But there's have to be pretty clear, pretty transparent rules and pretty difficult to manipulate, because otherwise definitely people will manipulate.
I feel like a crazy person. I always get yelled at online for defending Facebook and stuff, but I'm like, at least we can call Zuckerberg to Congress, right? Like, at least we can, versus TikTok, I think mostly gets, not a free pass. I think people are cognizant of this, but it's pretty scary, right? Like the amount of stuff that's going on.
It's scary. It's a great platform to influence behavior.
100%.
So I was actually told a pretty good anecdote that I really believe, that the initial plan when Musical.ly sold was to basically dumb down the American kids so that China can compete better with us, which actually is a pretty good strategy in some ways. that isn't like, arguably that's not a short-term national security problem, but it is actually, it sort of betrays a certain mindset.
Totally. Well, I think American kids are probably doing it to themselves as well. It seems at times, but yeah.
Yeah, you never really know whether that's true, but I do think there are major issues in allowing the CCP to control content, manipulate content that affects a whole swath of the American public. We would not allow this on Twitter.